Happy video day, guys. Today we're doing a make up your mind because a brand new palette released from Colourpop called the Wild Nothing Palette. It retails for $18 US and it caught my attention. I have to admit. It kind of reminded me a lot of maybe the Natasha Denona Retro. It was giving me that kind of vibe. You guys know that the Retro is one of my favorite palettes as of right now. So when I saw Colourpop releasing this kind of similar themed, at least it looked like it, palette, I was very intrigued by it. And I'm gonna have to admit to you guys, I purchased it before doing my Make Up Your Mind. I know that's very strange for me. I usually don't do that. I usually do the Make Up Your Mind first and then I make up my mind whether I want to buy it or not. But this one, I personally just felt like I wanted, so I went ahead and I bought it already. So right now, I'm actually going to be going through the process of the Make Up Your Mind after already purchasing it. So this can be a regret video. But even though I already purchased the palette, I still want to do this Make Up Your Mind because I'm very interested in seeing how unique this is to my collection. I want to kind of just see if I made a mistake by buying it. But either way, I always tell you guys it's a great idea to go through your collection and try to find similar hues in your collection, swatch it out on your arm, get an idea of the color story, see how many of those colors you already own, and also how many times you're going to actually use that color story before you go and buy a new eyeshadow palette. And for today's Insta challenge, I did post this photo right here on Instagram and I asked you guys to guess which palette I was going to mimic this week on Make Up Your Mind, and these are all the people who actually got it right. So thank you guys so much for entering into my Insta challenge. If you guys want to get featured in my next Make Up Your Mind, don't forget to follow me over on Instagram at Christina Brooke Beauty. Just wait for me to post an image that shows you swatches and I ask you guys what palette you think I'm going to mimic. Guess right, and some of you guys will show up in my next video. But we're gonna do this. We're gonna jump into every single palette that I have lying in front of me. I'm gonna tell you what I'm thinking, and yeah, if you guys are new, I'm Christina Brooke. Hit the subscribe button. I do Make Up Your Minds every single week where I go over a brand new release and I try to find it and I tell you guys how unique I think it's going to be. Let's get into it right now. I always want to show you the results in the beginning because I really think it's important for you guys to see where we're going with this video, and these are the results. So I had to use the swatches from Beauty Just for Fun because I was looking for good Colourpop swatches and I honestly could not find any. Colourpop did release this palette with no swatches and there was no Insta stories at the time of me filming this. So I did use this image in order to find the colors, and I also kind of referenced it to the colors of the palette. If you guys do this at home, try not to go by the colors inside of a pan because when they swatch, they can look super different than they look in the pan. I've noticed that so many times over, and swatches are just a little bit more true to color. So let me show you guys the palettes that I used. So the first one that I used, and I honestly didn't think I was gonna have to add this one, but I did, is the Yes Please from Colourpop. I also used the Huda Beauty Emerald Obsession. I used the Huda Beauty Mini Nude. I used the Marc Jacobs Gold. This is the Extravaganza palette. I had one color come out of the big Huda Beauty Nude palette, and I had two Natasha Denonas in here. I had the Mini Retro and the Mini Glam. So I had to use quite a few palettes in order to come out with this color story. Now, I feel like for me personally, I don't know about your personal collections, a light color story palette like this one is very different for me because I feel like what I have been purchasing lately, or what I have been seeing a lot lately, has been very warm tone palettes, purples, also, you know, reds and oranges and deep browns, and I haven't seen many palettes with a color story like the Natasha Denona Retro that everything's a little bit lighter, and I do feel like that was one of the points that made me really want to buy this because I felt like, damn, that's kind of unique for me because I don't have many palettes with a very light, very airy, very soft overall vibe to it. So that's the reason that I bought it like right away, because I was like, I don't have that. But that doesn't mean that I don't have it in my collection, and I do know a lot of you guys are wondering how close it is to this palette, so we're gonna get into that. But let me go ahead and let me show you the first color. So for the first color, this one right here is kind of like a light creamish white, at least that's what it looks like. The color that I was able to reference it to was inside of the Mini Nude. What I did was I grabbed this color right here in the center. I feel like that's going to be a very close color. If it is not, there is so many many palettes with like kind of like this type of nudish kind of vibe, you know, almost white color, that I feel like in my collection I'm probably going to find something very similar to this first shade. So the first shade on its own, you know, okay, it's nice, I have it, but it's nice. So the next color is one that I honestly have to tell you guys, I'm having a very hard time trying to figure out what color this is. I ended up just saying that maybe it is something like the Emerald Obsession, this like greenish color mixed with this lighter green to kind of create like a goldish green color. Like that is what I'm thinking it looks like. I'm having a hard time figuring out this color, and I really do feel like it's just the swatches on this palette, since there's not like perfect swatches. It's hard for me to really see if this has more green or more gold in it. So I'm going with this tone. Now, if it is more gold, I would say I have a lot more gold in my collection. So if it goes more the gold route, I would have a lot more to pick from. But I'm thinking it goes more into the green route, which I don't have many greenish gold colors. So that's where I'm gonna leave it. That's where I think it is. And if it is greenish gold, then it's probably really cool because I really don't have that. So the next one is another one that from the swatch, what I'm thinking it's gonna look kind of similar to is in the Natasha Mini Glam palette. There's this tone right here at the end. It's kind of like a goldish peach, and I feel like that's going to be a similar tone. From what I can see in the swatch, it reminds me of this color. I don't think that this color is very unique. I think it's pretty. I don't think it's very unique. However, judging off of the first three colors, I like them together. I'm figuring that this is looking like what I'm saying, like a very airy, soft palette, very different for me. The only other palette that I know, like a full palette that I have that has a vibe like that, is this one, and this one goes very rosy, whereas this one is not going rosy, which I kind of enjoyed. So now the next one, same that it doesn't go rosy, the next one is a little bit more, like I guess a little bit more rosy, you would say. Inside of the Mini Nude from Huda Beauty, there's this really pretty kind of almost corally color, but it's like a very faint coral. It's in between a pink and a coral. This color to me looks very similar to what I'm seeing in the swatch. I love that color. It is one of my favorite colors ever, and I really, really love Colourpop's formula. So if this is a very similar color to the color inside of this Mini Nude, I am going to be so excited. I'm gonna think it's amazing because I really love that color. And the color story so far, even though very light, seems very pretty. Now, it does not match to the color inside of the Mini Retro. This color right here from the swatch, it looks like it's a lot more rosy, and the color that's looking like the color that I see inside of the new palette from Colourpop looks like it's going more coral than rosy. Besides just having it in this palette, I do have that same color, like that same almost color inside of the Yes Please. It's this color right here. So both of these are basically almost the same color. I do think that this palette is going to have maybe the third finger swatch of the same exact color. Okay, so the next one, this is the one that I'm not sure. I ended up leaving it at the Yes Please and thinking that maybe it's gonna be similar to this second tone here. Now this second tone does go a little bit more orange. I think that the one that's gonna be in the new palette is not gonna be as orange, maybe a little bit more brown, a little bit more subtle. If it is, I think I'm going to love it. Today, I'm actually wearing this color all over the lid. You guys can see how bright it is. So I think a toned down version of this color would actually be very pretty. There is a color similar to it in the Sunrise from Natasha Denona, but I still think that this color might be a little bit more brown. So I'm hoping that it's a little bit more brown. If it is, it's going to be very different from my swatch, which would actually make me happy, because I'm hoping it is. So the next color is a color that I really love, and I have it inside of the Huda Beauty Emerald Obsession. This first tone here, I think this tone is so beautiful. I don't use it that often, but it's such a pretty tone, and I love the way it looks with the peach. I think these two colors together is like kind of what kind of sold me on this palette. I just love the green and the peach together. Now, when I'm using this palette, I don't have that option. So sometimes I do forget that I want to mix those colors together. So that is another buying point for a palette. Like for me, I like the way the tones are all vibing together. Like for example, the first few here, I'm like, ooh, that can create some really soft looks that I think I'm going to love. And that emeraldy color that they popped in there, it just, oh my God, I don't know, it just, to me, it looks gorgeous. So I'm really liking the way the palette is going so far. Even if some of the tones are a little bit different, like a slight difference, it's still having a color story that I'm enjoying. So for the next one, what I ended up doing was going into the Mini Glam. This is another one, I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be very similar to this tone, but I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit of a cooler toned golden brown type of tone. Another really beautiful color. And if you guys can just see those four, how pretty they look. Okay, so now I actually did jump into the Mini Retro. And honestly, guys, the only color from the Mini Retro that I think is going to be kind of similar is going to be this last one right here. I think that this has a similar tone to what's going on inside of the new palette. Now, I'm not 100% sure if it's going to go the same pinky route, but when I swatched it up against this color inside of the new palette, I almost felt like it has a similar shift. I'm not sure if it's going to be spot on, but I can already kind of see a similar color story happening here. Very, very pretty. I'm actually really liking it. I mean, I know that it's not like this most exciting thing, but I'm really liking it. I think it's really pretty. Okay, so now is when I jump into the Extravaganza palette. Now, I was looking at a bunch of palettes for this exact tone. The only palette that I have a brown that looks like this, it's of a more cool tone taupe, and I love this brown. I think it's so beautiful, but like I said, I only really have it in this palette, and this palette gives you certain looks, and it gives you very, very pretty looks, but I really wanted it in a different palette, and I do think that with this color story, it's already looking very pretty, and I really, really like that color. So I'm hoping that it's very similar to this. It's almost like in between a brown with a little bit like a rosy hint to it. Very, very pretty color. Okay, so the next one, I actually had to jump into the new Nude, and that's because I couldn't find anybody who had something similar to this color called Raw. When I'm looking at the swatches, it reminds me of this. It's almost like a brown, but with a little bit of rose to it. And the only palette that I have that looks similar to that is this palette. I do feel like from the swatch and looking at a decent image of this palette, it's gonna have a little bit of like a burgundy. It's gonna not be a super brown. So that's what I'm seeing. That's what I think. Next one, I went into the Mini Nude one more time, and I grabbed this last color right here. It is also like a brown, but it's kind of like a brown with a little bit of warmth to it. It goes a little bit more orange. When I swatch this color right here, it reminds me of that brown. It's when you blend it out, it reminds me a lot of the tone that I'm seeing inside of the palette. So that's where I went with it. I think it might be similar, and if not, it might be a little lighter than this color, but in that way, I'm still okay. And the last tone. So the last tone had me very stuck because it looks like a deep brown, but when I looked at the swatch, I almost felt like it was like a deep brown with a little bit of red in it. So the only palette that had something similar was the Yes Please, and I grabbed this last tone right here. It's a very deep brown, but when you swatch it, you can kind of see that it has like a red hint to it. And that is the only palette that I had that had like a brown like that. I looked through a lot of them. A lot of them that I had, the browns went very cool. And even in the Natasha Denona Gold palette, a lot of them are just, they're just not the same. It's not this kind of brown. So that is where I went, and this is the color story that I came out with. And I'm going to tell you guys, I feel like I had a harder time finding these colors. If you own a lot of the Colourpop palettes, I would tell you to look at them, because I do feel like these are similar kind of undertone colors that Colourpop likes to use a lot. So I do feel like some of the browns and the deeper browns, you might actually have those if you own a lot of Colourpop. And if you have the Solstice palette, I'll put it up here. I was looking at that one, and that one looks almost like the mini version of this palette. Like that palette was, that Solstice palette was like the inspiration for this big palette. So I think if you have that palette, you might not need this. But other than that, if you have any of like the newer released palettes, I don't think that there has been too much on the market exactly like this. Now, the Mini Retro is the one that I really thought I was going to have a lot of the colors from, but at the end of the day, it really is not that similar in the sense, it's really not that similar. These two colors here that look more green on camera, actually like a greeny gray. And this palette, the new palette from Colourpop, really doesn't have green in it. It only has that one pop of green that's coming out of here, which is that metallic-y green. But other than that, you don't really have blending shades that are green or gray green like this one. And then these other colors, it doesn't really have anything that's really rosy or dusty rose. So it's actually not similar to this. However, if Natasha Denona were to have made a big palette of this one, it could be a sister palette. It could be like an add-on palette having different colors. So I think that this palette might actually work really nice with the new Colourpop palette that's coming out, but they're not exactly the same. From the swatches, I'll let you guys know when I get my palette for sure, but from what I'm seeing in the swatches, they don't look like they're exactly the same. And I will say, from the swatches that I'm seeing, I love the color story of this palette. I think it's very soft. I think it's very pretty. I love Colourpop's formula, and I am going to make up my mind and say I'm picking up the palette because I already bought it. But I'm going to say that I still think, after swatching all of these, I still think that I made a good choice because the color story itself altogether is very different, very pretty, a lot of colors that I like to mix together. So I think that I'm going to be able to come up with some really nice looks with this palette. Now, the only thing that can make this palette like go completely south for me is if these colors are too light, like they don't show up on my skin and they're just very bland. If a palette has very light colors like this one and they show up good, I'm totally cool with it, even this palette. But if they are very bland colors that they just kind of like all like die into each other, then I'll be very disappointed. But from what I am seeing in this color story, there's enough deepening shades here that it looks to me like I may be able to come up with some pretty looks. So I'm crossing my fingers and I'm excited to get it. Of course, you guys, I will have a first impression up and I will compare it to the swatches from Make Up Your Mind to see how good I did or to see if I really didn't have this palette at all. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know down below if you guys are planning on picking up this palette or if you guys think you have something very similar. Don't forget to list the stuff that you think is very similar because people love to read what you guys find in your own collection. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.